Welcome to the Unfiltered Show from the Score Studios. My name's Joseph Casciaro. That's Levi Smith. Levi, what's going on, man? How's it going?
Doing good. We're still back, getting through the dog days of summer once again, but things are turning up. We're getting some more debates here. I like it a lot.
Yeah, I think that's how you know we're inching closer to the season because there are more things to talk about than some of the last few weeks. Today we're going to talk about Jamal Murray's max extension in Denver. We're going to talk about Brandon Ingram's discontent and maybe his trade market. Maybe touch on a couple first-time All-Stars or people we think are going to be first-time All-Stars. We're going to bring our guy Brad Parker in from New York later to talk about the latest chapter of the Shaquille O'Neal versus Rudy Gobert beef, the gift that just keeps on giving unless you're Rudy Gobert. But before we get to all that, just real quick, something I saw this morning, I felt we had to touch on it, even though we didn't plan to earlier. Trae Young's comment. I'm sure you saw this.
Oh, yeah.
Trae Young said that if he was 6'8", or he feels like if he was 6'8", he'd be the best player of all time. Because when you consider his offensive skills and the things that he can do, if you put that in a 6'8" guy and you eliminate all the limitations that come with being a kind of slight 6'2" guy, obviously he's very defensively deficient, all those things, he'd be the greatest of all time. I mean, I got my opinion on this, so here's how I'm going to frame the question, Levi. How lame is this statement, or do you agree with him?
Okay, I'll say this because, I was reading through the discourse in the comment section, and, everyone's saying, oh, obviously, like, whatever metaphor they can come up with, obviously that's true. And I don't disagree. I mean, this is things that, like, this is going to be maybe a bad look for my basketball rep. But, like, I've said before, like, oh, yeah, I think I've got a handle. I can shoot a little bit. Maybe if I had 2 feet, I'd be in the NBA. But for a guy that's in the NBA to be saying this, especially considering you look at, like, so 6'8" was the height he listed. Luka Doncic is just about 6'8". Magic Johnson was 6'8". He's saying that those are the tall point guards. He's saying he's them with a couple extra inches. Like, I don't even buy it still. I know he can shoot a little bit better maybe than Magic, and I don't really know what he can do better than Luka, but it's just every undersized guy, I think, believes this, and none of them have the nerve to just go out and say it, and he just decided to. So, I think we're on the same side of this argument. Not to say, like, if Allen Iverson was 6'9", he'd be awesome. He'd be really awesome, but that's just not the case.
Right, and that's always my thing whenever any of these guys say stuff like this. It's like, okay, in this alternate reality where you've been gifted 6 more inches, what about everyone else? Like, Steph Curry's a 6'3" guard, I think. Does he also get the benefit of those 6? Is Steph Curry now 6'9" in this alternate universe? Because guess what? He's still better than you, and all these other guards that are already better than you that also get the height. Or are you literally saying, hey, if my biggest physical limitation was remedied and everyone else just stayed the exact same, I'd be better than all of them? Because then, I'm going to be honest, Trae, I don't really think that's that great of a statement. Like, what are we really talking about here? So, this not a good look, Trae.
No, it's nice to get the ball rolling a little bit.
Yeah, thank you for the content, but not a good look. All right, let's go to some of our top stories now. Jamal Murray. The Nuggets gave him a 4-year, $208 million max extension that keeps him under contract through the 2028-2029 season. Also the most money ever given to a non-All-Star. Levi, is there any reason to be concerned? Are you concerned about this deal and how it will age, or do you think this was just a no-brainer for the second most important piece of their championship puzzle?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't be concerned if I'm in Denver. And obviously I think Jamal Murray's going to continue to be good down the road. But I almost like the tidbit that it's the biggest contract for a non-All-Star, because he's never gotten the recognition of being an All-Star yet. But that title gives him some additional recognition that I think he deserves. No, if I'm Denver, I like this deal a lot. He's just been such a key part. In the All-Star games, you can throw him out because he won a championship. He steps up in the playoffs. I think he averages like 7 or 8 more points in his career in the playoffs than he does in the regular season. So I'm just happy to see, a guy get rewarded despite not getting those accolades. And I mean, if we want to keep talking about the All-Stars too, look who he's dealing with in the West. It's been impossible for anybody that's not named Steph Curry or Dame or, now Ant and SGA are there. Like, there's so many good guards in the West. So to see a guy who also, underperformed at the Olympics for us, for our Canadian team, but at the end of the day, he stepped up in the playoffs. That's what matters most. And I have no problem with how this deal will look down the road and everything. As long as you can keep him and Jokic together, they'll be a contender.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, when Jokic and Murray are both in the lineup in a playoff series, the Nuggets have won 8 of 11 playoff series. Okay, and so I get all that, and I'm with you in that. Listen, I think I come at this from an interesting perspective where I think that it's a perfectly defensible deal, and I understand why they did it, but I'm still concerned. And here's why. So, like, okay, in terms of it being perfectly defensible, he's one of the most important players in franchise history, big piece of their championship puzzle, complements Jokic perfectly, is one of the all-time playoff performers, literally an all-time playoff performer, and has basically been as good as a non-all-star gets when you look at, like, how efficient he's been over the years and all that. But at the same time, and I'll also add, if you're the Nuggets, he's got a year left on his deal. You don't have the flexibility to replace him if he walks in a year. So, like, it's defensible. You could argue, did they really have to max him out to keep him in Denver? But again, without the flexibility to replace him, a non-destination market, they probably couldn't afford to find out. So I get all that. I'm not going to argue with the fact they gave him the deal. But I do think there's reason to be concerned when you consider, we've got it up on the board here, you look at not just the contract, but the percentage of the cap in each year, right? Like, okay, this year, part of the old contract is already at a quarter of the cap. But, you're looking at, 27 to 30% of the cap for the remainder of the decade once the extension kicks in. That is all-star money.
Yeah.
And in this second apron world where we thought teams are going to be more selective about how they give out max contracts, when you have less margin for error in roster construction and all that, if you're giving a guy legit all-star money, you need all-star level production. At the very least, the bare minimum, you could say what he's already given them. If he just does that the rest of the decade, it's fine. Because it's basically all-star production just without the actual all-star accolades. That's fine. But I am concerned with whether he's actually able to continue to do that, as I just adjust my earpiece here as it falls out, for the rest of the decade, because this is a guy that does have a major knee injury. He's a guard with major knee injury in his rear view. He has not played more than 65 games in a season since 2018-19. And you alluded to it, the Olympics this year. We did just see a playoffs and an Olympics where he was a shell of himself because of an ankle injury and apparently other ailments. So, look, he's only 27. He's not washed. He's far from it. But I do think there are reasons to be concerned when you talk about whether, his on-court value will be worth 27 to 30% of the cap in an environment where you do not have any margin for error. So, very long-winded way of saying, I understand why they did it. I think it's defensible that they did it, but they need more from him than ever before, and I don't know if it's fair to expect that from him.
Yeah. No, you're right, and I think maybe something I also didn't consider during my answer, but Jamal Murray is not Luka Doncic in the sense of he's not the same player without his explosiveness. It's how he's so good. He drives to the rack, 360 layups, and getting a lot of elevation on his jump shots and stuff. Like, he needs to be healthy to be a good basketball player. And yeah, you're right. When he becomes a shell of himself, he has looked far from what he was. So I definitely can 100% agree with that stance, and that they're banking on him being healthy. Otherwise, this very well could turn into a bad deal. So I'm kind of retracing my steps a little bit. I'm just hoping that, for his sake, he's going to be healthy.
Yeah, so. I definitely want him to live up to the contract. I think it'd be great. And listen, hey, maybe months from now we're talking about him making the All-Star team, and everything is great. Okay, a guy that does not seem like he's going to be staying put for as long as Jamal Murray is Brandon Ingram in New Orleans. He's been in trade rumors reportedly for a while now. He's on an expiring deal worth about $36 million. Just last week, it was reported that he was one of only 2 Pelicans players that did not attend a voluntary workout in the summer. They also traded for DeJounte Murray, so he especially seems like the odd man out when you consider that Murray, Zion Williamson, and CJ McCollum all under long-term team control, whereas Ingram's not. And then finally, a few days ago, he posted on Instagram a clip of a Houston area pastor talking about the importance of getting out of environments where people don't appreciate your true value. So you add everything up, it doesn't seem like Brandon Ingram is long for New Orleans. Do you see a trade market for him though? And if you do, where are your preferred landing spots? Because it's not that simple to just put him somewhere.
No, it's not. And when I was going through, it's actually funny. First of all, this voluntary workout, people, there's always going to be the people, oh, don't make a big deal of that. He was the one that organized this in New Orleans to begin with, which I found out was funny. So, like, he was kind of the founder of this voluntary workout. Now he's not there. So I think that indicates everything we need to know. In terms of his market and his value right now, he's in a tricky spot because he wants that max deal next offseason. And I think the Pelicans have already found out teams don't want to give him that. Otherwise, I think they would have a ton of offers that they would have accepted by now. So I think we kind of can begin to understand where we're at in that. But I've got a few different landing spots that I think they could all work out. I'll save the best for last and one that I've talked about on the show before. But the first train of thought I have is, these teams that aren't great, that could carve out the max money, who just want to get a franchise player in the door. You look at a team like the Pistons. They've got a bunch of young guys that I think they could ship off and make room for him to elevate their rebuild. I don't think it's super realistic because I trust Masai Ujiri a lot more than other GMs and stuff. But the Raptors, you could throw them in the mix because the big thing that the Pelicans need is a center. They've got I don't even know how to pronounce his name. Yves Missy. Did I just butcher that completely?
We both are about to butcher that.
Okay,
so,
okay. Yeah. They've got him starting at center right now on their depth chart. So they want to bring in a center for sure and get rid of Brandon Ingram.
Or go Zion at center, which I don't think you want to do over the full season.
Yeah, no, I agree. Then you look at, the teams who maybe his market dies down so much that all of a sudden he's a cheap rental and you don't have to give that much up. I think the Bucks could be a serious team to move in and do something like that. The Lakers, we always got to throw the Lakers up just to spice things up. They got Rui, they got Jared Vanderbilt. Maybe just throw those guys at them and take them. It's funny, too, because the Pelicans seem like if that's the case, they would be a perfect spot for Brandon Ingram. They're a team that has a lot of guys in win-now mode. So to be able to bring in a rental who's been an all-star and stuff, they would almost be, if he was elsewhere, I think they would be a good fit for him. Obviously, that's not the case. But the team, I think, makes the complete most sense. And like I said, I've talked about on the show before, I really like the fit with the Miami Heat because they've been testing out the Bam, Jimmy Butler thing for a couple of years. They've gone to the finals with them, to give them credit. But if they really want to see, first of all, if Jimmy's worth extending after this season and what he's capable of with another good player there, it's a perfect opportunity to bring Brandon Ingram in. Or if they're ready to move on from Jimmy Butler, bring Brandon Ingram in, sign him to the deal, and Jimmy Butler can kick rocks. So I think they've needed a third star for a long time because they can't get over that hump. I think he's a great fit for them.
My thing with Brandon Ingram and his market and why I think it's just so dry is like, look, he is a good player, but he is not a plug-and-play type. I've said this before, but I think when you consider his mid-range game, his improved playmaking, his ability to draw fouls, he is like a longer but less accomplished DeMar DeRozan. And I don't even mean that as a slight. Like, listen, DeMar DeRozan has a Hall of Fame case. Like, I'm not trying to slight him. I love DeMar. But what I am saying is that they're not plug-and-play types. It is hard to just put those guys on any team in any offense, right? And then you start to think about the type of teams that would usually be interested in a one-year rental, like contenders, but contenders probably already have a ball-dominant player better than Brandon Ingram.
Yeah.
And then you start thinking, like, okay, well, he's only 27. He can be part of, like, a team that's building and up-and-coming. And, like, yeah, sure, he can be. But what up-and-coming teams want to trade a bunch of assets to gamble on the fact they can re-sign Brandon Ingram when he reportedly wants a max extension that, as we noted when we were talking about Jamal Murray, like, teams are supposed to be more selective about in this new cap world, in this new second apron world. And I don't think Brandon Ingram's going to get that max. So unless he really reevaluates and becomes more realistic about his personal value, or unless the Pelicans really lower the asking price in trade talks, I think it's going to be really hard for him to get out of New Orleans, and maybe the resolution will have to wait until free agency. Two teams I've got in mind that I think are a little more under the radar but make a lot of sense. Cleveland, to me, makes the most sense as a team that for so long has been just kind of missing that small forward to tie everything together with their big four. Now, they probably got to move one of those guys to bring him in, but still, I think looking at a team that could like use his skill set, he would actually be somewhat of a missing piece, and they're close enough to contention to justify it. I think Cleveland makes the most sense. And then out of the kind of up-and-coming teams that I think it could make sense, and I bring them up all the time with these kind of trade talks now, but is San Antonio.
Yeah.
Where, I think, Wemby's going to be the undisputed guy there. Devin Vassell, who we'll talk about later, might be like a good secondary scoring guard to have there. If you had Ingram as that secondary scoring forward, secondary playmaker, I think that could work there. So I'm looking at Cleveland and San Antonio. That's even if he gets moved, though. Like I said, I just think it's going to be really hard for him to actually find himself in a trade.
I agree. But I will say, like I was talking about, I'm excited to see if he sticks around. I think they'll be a great team, especially with DeJounte Murray in. And they actually,
you're not worried about too many cooks in the kitchen?
Well, I'm not in the sense. Maybe actually I should be a little bit, but C.J. McCollum is not the primary ball handler anymore, so I think his position will be much more solidified. He's a catch and shoot guy. He's getting old. DeJounte Murray can distribute a lot better than C.J. McCollum can as well. Like we said, they don't really have a center right now, so unless they put Zion at the 5, which would almost open up things more for Brandon Ingram, I don't hate where they're at all in just keeping him. Obviously, you're going to get to the contract extensions, and then they're just going to let him walk for nothing. But, it's just not a good spot to be in for the Pels or for Brandon Ingram.
I just think it's such a tough fit because I think it's been proven that, and again, obviously this is a lot contingent on Zion staying healthy, which we've talked about in previous weeks, but Zion's at his best when the ball's in his hands, whether it's as a point center, point forward, whatever you want to say. And now they bring in DeJounte Murray, who's going to also have the ball in his hands, isn't a great off-ball player, like you said, good distributor, whether you want to call him a secondary playmaker, scorer, whatever. Then you've got C.J. McCollum, who's going to be the off-ball shooter that can pick up some of the ball handling duties, whatever. That's a lot of scoring, playmaking, ball handling, shooting, whatever you want to say. And then it's then you have Brandon Ingram, who kind of needs the ball as well because he's not the best off-ball player. I just don't know how it's going to work. I think it's a really weird situation for New Orleans. Talent-wise, I agree with you. There's a lot there. If you just look at pure talent, they're up there with a lot of teams. But how to make it work is going to be difficult. And trying to trade him is going to be difficult. So they're in it's kind of a catch-22 here.
Yeah, seriously.
Okay, I mentioned Devin Vassell a little bit. So shameless plug, myself and NBA feature writer Joe Wolfon. We have a series going on that we do every year throughout the summer, looking at our most interesting players to watch for the coming season. And my last entry in that series last week was on Devin Vassell in San Antonio. And even for me, who covers the NBA on a full-time basis, who, was impressed by Devin Vassell last year, when I started looking into the numbers, I was even more impressed than I had been watching him all year. I just think this guy was quietly one of the most improved players in the league last year. I always talk about comparing him to Kobe White, and there was so much buzz around the in-season improvement of Kobe White. Devin Vassell scored more on higher efficiency than Kobe White, and he's 6 months younger.
There you go.
If you look at Devin Vassell, now I know these are very specific kind of catches, but still, 19.5 plus points while shooting as well as Vassell did from 2-point range and as well as he did from 3-point range, age 23 younger. The only other guys ever done that, Cat twice, Jaylen Brown, Tyrese Halliburton. When Cat did it, he was an all-star. When Brown and Halliburton did it, the next years they became all-stars. So Vassell started sticking out to me as a guy who, look, would I pick him to make the all-star team in the West? No. Yeah. But if you're talking about, under-the-radar potential guys who can make all-star leaps, first-time all-stars, Vassell, to me, on a team where now they're going to be a lot more attention. Wemby's going to have them more competitive. Chris Paul has the offense more organized. He doesn't have to have as much of the playmaking duties that he was kind of thrust into. He's a low-turnover guy, too. A lot going for Devin Vassell on the offensive end. And he was a really good defensive player in college that really hasn't translated to the NBA, but maybe in a more competitive environment, that two-way breakout is coming.
Yeah.
So Vassell, to me, stood out as a low-key first-time All-Star. It doesn't have to be low-key, but is there a guy in your mind who going into 2024-25, you're like, that's my pick for a guy that is going to be a first-time All-Star?
Yeah, I tried to, because, this is a great analysis, great stats here. Devin Vassell to be an All-Star, you're not hearing that take very often, so I tried to follow a little bit more suit because I think Wemby, I would hope, is a shoe-in. Yeah. And then even Jamal Murray, like we talked about before, he's never been one. It's bound to happen one time. But honestly, the guy that I like the most, and I think he has been he's just a product of being in a terrible environment, is Cade Cunningham. You look at the numbers he put up last year, 23, 7.5. 6 guys had more points than him, as well as more assists. It was Jokic, Luka, LeBron, Ja, LaMelo, and did I say LeBron?
You did.
I can't remember the last one, but
big names.
All All-Stars, all big names. he's had the numbers for a season now. I think it's just, like I said, it's a product of his environment. I think the Pistons aren't going to be awesome, but they're going to be a bit better. And I think it's time for him to get a little bit more respect than what he's being given, because he has been still a great player on this bad team. I mean, averaging 7.5 assists on the Detroit Pistons is nothing to scoff at. I think it's
he's going to stop turning the ball over, though.
He does need to stop turning the ball over.
To your point, though, bit of a product of his environment, not a lot of spacing.
That as well. And I mean, you look at the East too. This is a lot more of a landscape kind of selection, I think, because he could have been a second option on a playoff team. I think he's an all-star last year or the year before. So he's in the East and he's on the Pistons. I like his chances. So I think we're going to really start to see him break out. And I'm not high on the Pistons by any means, but I certainly have a little.
You don't think Tobias Harris changes everything?
Tobias Harris, yeah, I don't think he moves the needle. Maybe he'll be a first-time All-Star actually this year. But no, I've got a little bit more belief in them this year. I kind of like the direction they're headed towards, better than last year, and enough to the point where I think they won't have too many losses for him to be completely ruled out like he was last year. So yeah, I like Cade Cunningham.
And as much as I kind of tease about the Tobias Harris thing, look, they had to spend some money, and Tobias Harris can shoot. Like they need more spacing around Cade Cunningham. Like you said, he's a product of his environment. He needs a better environment. I think it will be slightly better this year. Yeah. And I think at some point there's going to be a little bit of a prove it factor with him too, where it's like, okay, you're putting up these numbers. At some point it has to translate, maybe not to winning yet, but to more competitive basketball, because, for as good as his numbers were, and I think he got better as the year went on, I also think he was a big part of the problem early in the year with his play and all that. But, all right, I think we can move on to bringing in our guy, Brad Parker.
Correspondent.
Who's always got his finger on the pulse of
he is.
Social topics, trending topics around the NBA and the sports world. Brad, what's going on, man?
Levi, Cash, what's going on? I got some social pulse action for you guys.
Yeah,
I'm excited.
I thought you were going to come in giving us your pick for a first-time All-Star, which I know if we're asking you, it's going to be Deuce McBride.
Yeah.
I want Deuce McBride. He's my 6th Man of the Year candidate, and he's going to be a first-time All-Star this year. But I actually love your Devin Vassell pick. Not going to lie. But I'm biased. My Knicks.
Yeah, I know Brad's a big Knicks guy. Not talking Knicks today, though. We're talking about the latest chapter in this ongoing feud. I mean, it's kind of a one-way feud because Gobert doesn't really usually say anything. That's usually Shaq just attacking him. But, Brad, tell us, for anyone that doesn't know about the Shaq versus Gobert beef, and explain to us the latest chapter in it.
Levi, Cash, buckle up for this one, because just when you thought the Rudy Gobert, Shaquille O'Neal drama was over, there's a new chapter to this saga. And like you said, it is pretty one-sided. So a couple days back, Shaq was interviewed by his son, Miles, who asked him who the worst player of all time is. And without hesitation, Shaq replied, Rudy Gobert, which it's not surprising if we think about it, considering there's a whole history of Shaq calling out Gobert publicly, ever since he signed that max contract in 2020, essentially. And then the trade with the Jazz and the blockbuster trade with the Jazz and the Wolves. Then Miles asked if he's worse than Ben Simmons, and Shaq replied, Simmons is another bum. So we'll get to that in a sec. But Shaq backed it up by going into how Rudy's getting paid $200 million plus, but he doesn't really play like it. Then he said, meaning Shaq, said that he earned his $120 million during his playing days. And so he essentially was, talking about how he really earned it. He put the work in. He deserved it. He lived up to it. And Rudy's not. And then Shaq doubled down on his comments, saying he's only speaking the truth and that Rudy and Ben should use this as motivation. So Gobert, like you mentioned, actually responded on X and pretty much said how sad it is that, Shaq's getting triggered by Rudy's finances and accomplishments, and just clapped back, but didn't really insult him or anything crazy. But he did. And it was nice to see Rudy speak up and defend himself. But here is my turn to weigh in. I think, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, I think Shaq's being a little too hard on Rudy. And, part of it, I'm sure, is jealousy on Shaq's part. It's a different era. Players are getting paid way more than in Shaq's day. Shaq made his 2 cents for sure. But this year, if Shaq was playing today, 10 years, $1 billion, easy.
Yeah. No, he'd get the max available in this, economy, depending how many. But yeah, he'd be making $50 to $60 million a year in this NBA economy.
I should say too, Shaq's probably just upset because he's been doing all these commercials for so many years, these sponsor deals.
Yeah.
He could just be playing basketball now instead and getting the same money.
Yeah, I don't know if Icy Hot's giving him the Rudy Gobert contract.
Not a chance in hell. But with that being said, more importantly to me, I think it's comical to say Rudy Gobert is the worst player of all time. I mean, he's statistically one of the best defensive players of his era, and the accolades back it up. He's a 7-time all-defense first-team guy. Shaq has 3 of those, by the way. Rudy's a 4-time Defensive Player of the Year winner. Shaq has never won a DPOY, which we're not going to hold against him because he was in an era with David Robinson and Patrick Ewing and Mutombo and David.
And Shaq just wasn't a defensive player, if we're being honest. Like, he picked and chose when he played defense.
Correct. Absolutely. Correct. But, and again, like, I'm not comparing their careers whatsoever. That would be dumb. But Gobert is not the worst player of all time. That title would probably belong to a guy by the name of James Curry. If you remember that name, you probably don't. He played on the Clippers for literally 3.9 seconds. It would go to a guy that played 1 game in the league, and literally it would be James Curry. That's the worst player of all time, not Rudy Gobert. Do you remember James Curry?
I remember the name. I'm not going to pretend I remember what he looked like or that I remembered how many seconds he played, but I do think that's a good point, not to slag on James Curry. Hey, good for he made the NBA. He's, in terms of just comparing him to the general population, the public, he's one of the greatest basketball players to ever live. He played in the NBA. But among NBA players, he might be the worst of all time. But I'm glad you brought that up, Brad, because it speaks to how ridiculous. Like, you mentioned Shaq being a little hard on Gobert. I think he's way hard on him. Like, to call one of the greatest defensive players in basketball history the worst NBA player of all time is so ludicrous and just shows how, like, warped that kind of old, like, angry old retired athlete that's, like you said, jealous of the modern contracts, how warped their brain has become when it comes to talking about this stuff, that he can't just say, hey, man, I hate the fact that, I was one of the greatest big men of all time and I couldn't make the money Rudy Gobert makes and I was a better player than him. Like, just say that. To really? He's the worst player of all time? What are you smoking, Shaq?
That's insane. So it was a different era, like I said. And I do think Shaq is a little jealous, and I think that he wishes he played in this era because he'd be a multi-billionaire, along with, obviously the acting and the endorsements and whatnot. But you know what's crazy? Shaq is already a billionaire, I'm pretty sure, based off everything. He's got his money. Why does he have to say these things to, like, stay relevant? You know what I mean? Like, and Gobert kind of alluded to that in his clapback, if you will. And I think it's like sour grapes. Like, Shaq's, like, obviously a little jealous, but also Shaq did say in a follow-up when he doubled down, he said that he's just brutally honest. That's how he is. You're getting with Shaq. And this is how he talked to his players on the Lakers and all the teams. He said basically, you're a $20 million guy, play like it. He's very critical. He's very tough. And that was also the old school mentality of thinking and whatnot, holding guys accountable to a certain standard. I get that a little bit from Shaq's way, but I think he's way too hard on Gobert.
Yeah, and I also think it shows just like a gross misunderstanding of basketball, which is hilarious coming from one of the greatest basketball players and most dominant basketball players ever, because like the whole earn your paycheck thing, like I don't want to rehash all the stuff with Rudy Gobert that we've talked about on this show during the playoffs and how I think people are too hard on him and take his value for granted. But like when Shaq says, you're getting this much play like that kind of player, it's like, well, just because Rudy Gobert's points per game aren't what you expect from a guy in a max contract doesn't mean he's not worth it. If he's literally the best or one of the 2 or 3 best defensive players in the game, defense is half the battle. It's half the game. And this guy's one of the top 3 at worst in that half of the game on the planet and has been for like a half decade now. Yeah. How are you going to say that guy's not earning his paycheck? And just last thing, and I'll toss it over to you, Levi, but the last thing I find ironic in all this, and this revisionist history that Shaq is trying to write here, or rewrite, when he made the comments about how, like, Brad, you alluded to it, Shaq said, like, he earned his page, and he said something like, the reason I can't walk normal now or that I can't turn my neck is because basically he's saying because I left it all out there when I played. Listen, I don't want to discount how much work went into Shaq's career. Again, we're talking about one of the most dominant and best players ever. Loved watching Shaq as a kid. But for maybe some of the young people, like maybe Levi, I don't know, you're younger, maybe you weren't around like back then watching it. One of the criticisms of Shaq back in the day was that he didn't work hard enough off the court, that he wasn't always in the best shape, that he picked and chose when to play defense. One of the biggest, like, points of tension between him and Kobe in their years-long feud. There was a lot that went into it, but one of them, when they were teammates, was that Kobe admittedly thought Shaq didn't work as hard as him. So, like, I just think it's really ironic that now 20 years later, you know, work ethic is one of the things Shaq is using against Rudy, and almost to say, like, you know, I earn my paychecks and you're not earning yours. Why? Because the guy's not scoring as much as you did?
Right,
like, come on,
exactly.
Shaq.
Cash, you're spot on. You're spot on. I totally agree with that. But one thing I will say, and I'll leave it at this, one thing Shaq did get right, Ben Simmons, bum. 5 years, $177 million. He's done next to nothing in 57 games with the Nets. But even he is still not the worst player of all time.
That's
He was once an all-star.
And still, that's
Correct.
a more appropriate guy to go after. That's a guy who is clearly not leaving it all out there right now. Yeah, I agree. You summarized it perfectly with everything you said. It's just like, oh, he averages 12 points over his career. Like, do you want Brandon Ingram then? Is Brandon Ingram better?
Right.
Or we see where he's
exactly.
at. We've talked about his market value right now. Yeah, it's just actually one of the worst guys to be attacking. Like, Rudy Gobert, I hate to say it, but like, he'll go down as one of the greatest defensive players ever. I think he's probably a lock for the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
4 Defensive Player of the Years. Doesn't happen all too often. So, it's just he loves the bully role too. He's done this before.
He picks these guys. JaVale McGee. He picks these guys to just absolutely dump on.
He was giving it to I can't recall. He was really giving it to somebody else on TV not too long ago.
Donovan Mitchell.
Donovan Mitchell. That's exactly who it was. Caught a lot of fire from that. Yeah, it's the wrong thing to do when you have all that status.
Yeah.
You uplift people. Don't hate on them.
Yeah.
I agree, totally.
Listen,
I love
though,
Shaq.
Shaq.
Love him.
Shaq, you want to come on the Unfiltered Show? I would love to have you. Would love to tell you why you're wrong about this, but we'd be honored to have you. So,
Is it? I mean, I gotta say, it's nice. We're getting this riled up. It's not NBA.
That's how you know.
It's not even preseason.
You know,
We're right there.
that chill is in the air.
We're right there.
The seasons are changing. Tides are turning. That the season is right around the corner because we're getting riled up about what one guy's saying about another guy. Love it. Love it. The NBA content for him. All right, Brad, thanks for plugging us into what's trending on social. We'll bring you in every week, every other week. Whenever you got something for us, we can talk about what's trending in the NBA. And we know once the season starts, we're going to be hard-pressed to come up with just one thing because there's going to be like 7 things every week we want to talk about, and we'll bring you back to do that. So appreciate your time, Brad. Levi, always appreciate the time. Everyone in the control room, Matt, Adrian, can't remember who else is here today. Appreciate all your work. So for Levi Smith, for Brad Parker, I'm Joseph Casciaro. This has been The Unfiltered Show. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.